I mentioned at the start of the show we have a guest joining us. He's very joined us numerous times before, Dr. Everett Piper. He is the author of the book, and I usually just say the first part of the title of the book, but it's a great title, Not a Daycare: The Devastating Consequences of Abandoning Truth. It's a fabulous title, and really a title that has great relevance, not just in the issues he talked about in his book, but in today's conversation around America as we watch the just destruction in front of us. So Dr. Everett Piper, former president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, columnist for the Washington Times, is going to join us by phone. Hello, Dr. Piper.
Hey, Debbie. How are you doing?
I'm well, and I'm glad to see you. So glad you could join me today. So this is not our big topic, but I actually realized as I was thinking about this interview today, driving here, are you having protests in Oklahoma? I don't know. I actually don't know if I read any about Oklahoma.
Yeah, Tulsa has suffered those, and Oklahoma City has likewise. In fact, I've got friends that own businesses down in Jenks, which is a suburb of Tulsa, where they've actually started boarding up their store windows to hopefully stave off some of the damage from the protests.
Well, I hope they were able to. I'll be talking about later in the show the most unfortunate property damage, destruction of businesses all over New York City, all over really, all over our country, and just the amazing inability, unwillingness of our law enforcement to stand up and to restore order. But I really want to talk to you about today. So there was an amazing Supreme Court decision. I'm sure you followed it. It related to the order by the California governor, Newsom. He is still all about the coronavirus and the shutdown and the limitations on how many people can be inside a church at the same time. So one particular church in California, a small church, I didn't actually recognize the name of it, but that small church brought a lawsuit, ended up in front of the Supreme Court. The question was whether Newsom's order related to coronavirus was a violation of the First Amendment, of the freedom of religion. And it wasn't an issued decision by the court in terms of hearing arguments and issuing a decision. It was a refusal of the court to take the case and therefore allowing the lower case ruling to stand, which essentially said, yes, the governor has the right to limit religious services in person. And in particular, a shock to a lot of people, of course, Chief Justice John Roberts taking the side of the usual liberal wing of the court, and not the reliable conservative we thought it might be. So I'm sure you studied that case and thought about, so what is your reaction to that case?
Well, it's a First Amendment issue, and I know I'm being presumptuous right now because I'm talking to a lawyer, so forgive me for that. So I'm going to add my layman's perspective to the First Amendment, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. It's my understanding that Madison wrote the First Amendment, and it said government does not have the authority to establish religion or to prohibit the free exercise thereof. That's my understanding of the First Amendment, or at least the religious freedom aspect of it. Now, Jefferson comes forward, I believe, 11 years after Madison writes the First Amendment, and he's got a bunch of nervous Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, who are worried that the government is going to intrude on their denominational polity and practice. And Jefferson says, no, the government can't do that because we have no authority to establish or to prohibit the free exercise of your faith, your religion. And he then says there's a wall separating the church from the state that will stop the state from doing that. My understanding, Debbie, is this, that the wall is there. Jefferson said there's a wall. It's not in the Constitution, it's not in the Bill of Rights, but he did say there's a wall separating the state from the church. That wall is a fortress. It's to keep the it's to keep the state out. It's not a prison to keep the church in. In other words, there's a door in the wall, and the church can come and go through that door in the fortress wall. It can come and go into culture and do its good work, be salt and light, and do what it's supposed to do in practicing its faith, practicing what it preaches. And then it can leave culture and leave society, go back through the door into the church, and it can shut the dumb thing and lock it from the inside and keep the government out of its business. That door is called the First Amendment. The government cannot establish, nor can it prohibit the free expression and practice and exercise of our faith. And here's the other thing. Well, some leftists out there will say, well, we're not prohibiting your freedom of worship. It doesn't say freedom of worship. It says freedom of religion, and religion is different than worship. Worship could be construed as a private thing that you just do in the privacy of your heart or in the privacy of the four walls of the church. Religion is a comprehensive, holistic thing where you actually practice what you preach. It's belief and behavior. It's faith and reason. It's practicing those things you claim to hold dear. It's engaging culture, not just being a private individual. I can't imagine how de Blasio or the governor of Chicago or the governor of California or even the stupid little mayor in Veneta, Oklahoma thinks it's their right to tell anybody in the church what they can or cannot do. And you know what? It's time for people in the church to start protesting, not violently, but they should start protesting by the thousands and see if these guys have the spine to actually throw them in jail.
Wow, I think you probably did go to law school. You're just not admitting it. But actually, yes, there is a First Amendment, very clear. This is a free exercise clause case. And that was the whole argument of these churches, is that Constitution, the very First Amendment says we have the right to free exercise of religion. And I'll tell you, it's even a little worse. I love what you said. I agree actually wholeheartedly with the idea that religious Americans should start going or feeling free to go to church. If you want to go to church and you live in a place where there are restrictions that say, well, you have to be 6 feet apart, or you only can have 25% of the capacity of your church, the seating capacity open now, you have to wait until you're told 50% and 75%. I think it is time for civil disobedience in this way. And I think also pastors should be more vocal about it. And so I love all that you said, and it is I think it's a window both on de Blasio's thinking and really on Justice John Roberts' thinking. It is a failure to elevate the primary importance of freedom of religion as part of what our country was founded on. I'll tell you something else about this decision. So Justice Roberts, who's, the kind of, what's a good term? He's just kind of perpetually unreliable or unpredictable. He's kind of like the John McCain of the Supreme Court. You don't have to answer that. But I will say, I do think what's especially interesting is in this case, the actual the states involved in this case, both states involved in this case had asked the justices to stay their hands because the cases were essentially moot, meaning all the court really had to say was, it appears these cases are now moot. But by jumping in and discussing the merits of the case, they essentially ignored what the states were saying. And I want to tell you what Kavanaugh, who wrote the it's not really a minority opinion, but wrote the explanation of why the judges were dissenting from the decision to refuse to take the case. Kavanaugh pointed out plain out, Newsom's order treats houses of worship less favorably than secular businesses such as factories, offices, supermarkets, restaurants, shopping malls, and even marijuana dispensaries. He's getting at the point Newsom's order, the California government's order, is even more restrictive of churches than it was of other businesses. That seems like an argument alone for the conservatives to say, wait a minute, we really got a problem here. We're going to take this case and look closely. I don't even know if you knew that aspect of the case, Dr. Piper, but do you have a reaction to that? Isn't that just mind-blowing?
Yes, I was aware of that, and it baffles my mind how Justice Roberts could disagree with Kavanaugh in that particular opinion. And added to that, not only is the church being treated with greater restrictions, being imposed upon with greater restrictions than Walmart or McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or, like Kavanaugh said, the marijuana dispensary, the church doesn't have the same freedoms to go about its business as the local marijuana shop does. That's asinine. That's crazy. But now we know that we can get together by the thousands in the streets of New York if we are exercising our right of assembly as Antifa or Black Lives Matter, but you can't get together by tens or even by 15 or even by 20 if you're going to go about exercising your religious freedom in the church. So you can go loot, and I like your distinction between protesters and looters. You can go loot by the thousands, and that's your constitutional right, but you can't go pray by, maybe the tens or the dozens. What sense does this make? The inconsistency and the bias against the church is rife. and it is time for civil disobedience, and it'll only be corrected when the church has the spine to step forward and say, we're going to church. Arrest us if you want.
Yeah, I actually don't think even Democrat governors, mayors in this country want that image on national television. I mean, there have been a few really unsavory images of mayors driving into a parking lot, even when the people in churches were in their cars, attending church in their cars, and the local officials driving through and writing down phone numbers, writing down license plates so they can actually fine people for going to church. But the image of actually dragging people out, I do think the coronavirus, COVID-19 shutdowns have reached the point where civil disobedience is happening around the country, especially in places where they're still most restrictive. One more element of this case, I think it's just really amazing. I mean, I didn't mean to sound too harsh about Justice John Roberts. I think I'll take him at face value. He's trying to do what he understands the law to require him to do. He did bail out entirely on the effort to try to remove the burden of Obamacare from America, and twice he sided with the people who were trying to keep Obamacare in place, and even in some of his statements and opinions kind of sounded like, well, it'd be a really bad thing in America if, we took this away. It was almost like a political assessment versus his job as a judge to apply the law to the facts and the Constitution to the facts. But in this case, to be clear, the Justice Department, the other reason this is so odd on his part, the Justice Department filed a statement of interest. It's a statement you can file with a court supporting a lawsuit by Michigan businesses that claim that their Democrat governor, Gretchen Whitmer, her restrictions are arbitrary and irrational. And announcing the action, the Civil Rights Division chief, Eric Dryban, proclaimed the Constitution permits appropriate state and local government restrictions to protect the health and safety of Americans, but it does not permit arbitrary limits that limit the right of all people in our country to be treated equally and fairly by the government. People are arguing that Roberts' unwillingness to just stay quiet in this case, but to actually wade in, is essentially cutting against this anti-discrimination theory. So in rejecting religious liberty, Roberts countered that it is not a matter of unlawful discrimination if different things are regulated in different ways. That is true. That's a mind-blowing statement by him. Roberts counters is not a matter of unlawful discrimination if different things are regulated in different ways.
Well, it almost makes you wonder if he's even turned on the news. Has he read the newspaper? I mean, my land, how can you claim that the church is not being regulated in a different way than all these other entities that Kavanaugh cited? The liquor store, the marijuana dispenser, McDonald's, big box stores like Lowe's and Walmart. All of these have enjoyed greater freedoms to go about their daily business than the church. So how in the world can Roberts claim that there's no discrimination against the church when it's obvious that the church has greater restrictions upon it than the McDonald's drive-through window? I mean, my land, I can't go to a drive-in service and read my Bible at my local church, but I can go through the drive-in window at McDonald's and get a burger? What sense does this make? Why is one legal and the other isn't when the church is protected by the First Amendment? Last I knew, McDonald's wasn't.
There are no hamburgers in the First Amendment. But it does lead to a larger topic, which you and I have talked about before. But in this election season, we're coming up. I feel like I say that well before elections happen. We're only in June and elections are in November, but we're in an election season. We have a very hotly contested, very, very high profile presidential primary ongoing on the left. And we have Biden seeming to think he can get the nomination and beat President Trump. We have a lot of tension. And many people talk more and more, and you had an article, this was actually now May 2nd, so it's over over 4 weeks ago. It was called Freedom Hangs in the Balance During This Election Season. And I thought it was so timely, even as of today, and what we're seeing with Justice Roberts. So you see more ways in which freedom hangs in the balance during this election season today than when you wrote this article in May?
Oh, I really do. I mean, we see this anarchy. We see the rise of Antifa. We see the looting. We see the lawlessness in our streets. We see the Democrats doing nothing about it. In fact, condemning those as being racist and bigots who want to do something about it. You see Black Lives Matter. Debbie, one of the things I want to point out here in terms of the loss of freedom is how ideas have consequences. And when we embrace these given ideas that are grounded in socialism and communism and Marxism, those are antithetical to freedom. Black Lives Matter. We've got lots of pastors saying, well, we need to stand with Black Lives Matter. We've got lots of evangelical leaders saying we need to stand with Black Lives Matter. Go read their website. Click on what we believe on the Black Lives Matter website. And it says this. It says we believe in the queering of the traditional nuclear family. We believe in the dismantling of patriarchal practices. This is the kind of stuff that they say on Black Lives Matter website. This is what they believe. So why in the world is the church, anyone who believes in the dignity of the human being, in the nuclear family, in traditional definitions of what it means to be a free American, anyone that believes in our constitutional republic versus a Marxist culture, why in the world would we remain silent when BLM is waving their flag, championing, quote unquote, the queering of the nuclear family and the dismantling of patriarchy? How can you claim to be for blacks and black families when you're saying and you're admitting that you believe the patriarchy of the family is negative? You're diminishing the importance of black fatherhood, which we know statistically is leading to crime, dysfunction, disease, malnutrition, and child dysfunction, and yet we're marching with these people as if they have something positive to say.
I'm so glad you raised that, Dr. Piper. I'd actually forgotten. The Black Lives Matter website is a great place to go. Forget about listening to pundits or people you think are too opinionated one way or the other. Read what they say about themselves, because what they say, Black Lives Matter website itself says, is antithetical to the very culture, fabric, founding identity of America. I'd forgotten about that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So I urge our listeners to do that. Dr. Piper, you also had a column, your Washington Times column, and again, I always tell our listeners the links I'm talking about today are up at our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down, list of links. You can read these articles yourself. But the article that I want to mention that you put out was called, Dr. Piper, "No Politician Has the Right to Dictate, Contradict, or Contravene Religious Beliefs." I'd kind of forgotten until I looked at it again this morning, the litany of examples that already exist. I played my first segment today, the mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, saying it's very different. You can let looters rob and destroy property and steal, but people can't go to church. But he actually he singled out churches and synagogues, threatening to seize their property and shut them down permanently if they dared to defy his orders related to coronavirus. That's an antagonism against religion.
And he said that. He used the word seize the property, shut you down permanently. Permanently. He said that. And then you have Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago, who declared a Romanian church a public nuisance. A public nuisance. And she threatened to fine them, to jail them, and to shut them down. Now, this is a group of Christians who have experienced communist oppression. They're from Romania. They know what it's like not to have religious freedom. And Mayor Lightfoot is saying, I will fine you, I will jail you, and I will shut you down. And then she officially declared them a public nuisance. And then, as you said, we've got mayors in Kentucky who are going through the parking lots police, it's instructing their police to go through the parking lots of local churches and write down license plate numbers so that we are being tracked if we dare go to church. And then the poster child for me is in Veneta, Oklahoma, right up the road from me, a small little town in the reddest of red states where Mayor Chuck Hoskins actually issued an edict, a municipal order, an executive order, where he says you can't get in your truck and go fishing. You can't drive to the local lake and go fishing alone. You can't get in your truck and go hunting alone. And how dare you think of going to church? If you go to church, you will be fined up to $500 and up to 30 days in jail in Veneta, Oklahoma. Again, I say to those people that are listening, you just need to get up and go to church and tell them, go ahead, arrest me. If we did that by the thousands, I think we'd win.
I also think, yes, I agree with all of that. This idea about, I use the expression on this show, freedom is on the ballot in November of 2020. I actually think it's just a little bit of almost a positive thing, because really the veil being pulled back or people's eyes being opened, you see the antagonism of leftism toward religion and toward freedom. The idea that this Chuck Huskins and other mayors and members of city council and governors around this country have seized on almost the fluke or circumstance of having the coronavirus and having it be a problem, seized on it to really kind of test the question, do Americans still believe they have freedom? Can we chip away at that? Can we work away at them? Can we massage them out of thinking they have freedoms as our Constitution says, and that really they only have the freedom that we tell them that they have? And I love the idea. I'm actually a very law-abiding person. I'm in favor of law. I love law and order. But I think that the civil disobedience we're talking about here is really helpful in waking people up and in restoring the concept of law and order as it's supposed to be in our country. Your thoughts?
Well, again, I'm going to act like I'm a lawyer. You are, I'm not. So you can just explain it away after I'm off your show. But my understanding is I am obeying the law when I go to church, because the laws in the United States are endowed to us, the rights that we have in the United States. They're endowed to us by God. They're not given to us by government. So I'm obeying the law. I am honoring the rights that are endowed to us by our Creator. Those self-evident truths, those unalienable rights are not given to me by the local governor, by the mayor, or by the President of the United States, or anybody else for that matter. God gave them to me, and I'm going to exercise them. So I am obeying the law. It's the local mayor who isn't. So I'm going to church.
I want to add an amen on that. So, first of all, Dr. Piper, I'm so glad you're available to join us. It's always a very spirited conversation when I have you. And I almost always, when you're on the show, I get emails afterwards. I love when you have that guy, Dr. Piper, on. So I'm so glad you're available to join us today. I urge everyone to read his column in Washington Times, his columns in Washington Times. And also, he's got a personal website, Dr. Everett Piper. I'm sorry, is it .org, .com?
.com. It's Dr. Everett Piper, one word, DreverttPiper.com. And you can follow my new podcast, which is called The Rebellion. And I play off of Peter Kreeft's quote, "In times of universal deceit, truth is the only rebellion left."
I love that. Okay, you are gonna have. So when does that podcast start? When do you start doing it?
I started 2 weeks ago. I've got 17 episodes already posted. It's a show. It's a half-hour show. It's being carried on a local radio station. It's called The Rebellion with Dr. Everett Piper.
I am thrilled to hear that. Not you know you're doing that. It's just great. Are you still going to write for Washington Times too?
Yeah, the Washington Times is, I'm writing for them, and they're also going to pick up that podcast, and they're going to promote it there. So that'll be coming shortly.
That's a great thing. Well, you are just a treasure. Honest to goodness, I'm so grateful for all you do. I first learned about you when you were president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University and wrote that great column, I think in your student newspaper, This Is Not a Daycare, and it became a book, and it really became a very invigorating and inspiring and uplifting. You became a presence like that in the American political conversation, speaking up for religious liberty, putting issues, I love the historical context you can often bring to issues. I'm talking ancient historical context, American historical context. You really are an advocate for religious freedom, and I appreciate that so much. So Dr. Piper, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Take care. Blessings.
Thank you. Okay, folks, this is one just great American patriot and thinker and writer. Didn't know he had a podcast, so I will watch that and encourage you to check that out also.